I stood in the rain, my fingers numb around the handle of a suitcase that held my entire life, 52 years of it, packed into a single bag. The $6 in my pocket felt heavier than the bag itself, each crumpled bill a reminder of how little I had left. My daughter, Emily, stood in the doorway of the house I'd raised her in, her face as cold as the storm soaking through my coat. "You're not welcome here anymore, Mom," she'd said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. I wanted to scream, to beg, to remind her of the nights I'd stayed up sewing her prom dress or the mornings I'd driven her to school when she missed the bus. But her eyes, those green eyes I'd once thought mirrored my own, were hard, unyielding. She'd made her choice. I turned and walked down the street, the rain masking the tears I refused to let her see. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to keep moving. The betrayal burned in my chest, hotter than the cold biting my skin. Emily, my only child, had turned me out like I was nothing more than a stranger. I'd given her everything, every penny, every sacrifice, every piece of my heart, and now I was left with $6 and a suitcase that smelled faintly of mildew. The memory of her words looped in my mind, each one a fresh wound. "You're a burden," she'd said. "You've got nothing left to give." Nothing left to give. Those words clung to me as I found shelter under the awning of a gas station, the neon lights buzzing above me. I was Eleanor Hayes, a woman who'd once dreamed of painting the world with color, who'd traded her art for a steady job to raise her daughter alone after her father walked out. I'd been a mother, a provider, a rock. Now, I was nobody. The gas station clerk, a young man with tired eyes, offered me a cup of coffee when he saw me shivering. I thanked him, clutching the paper cup like it was a lifeline. The warmth seeped into my hands, but it couldn't touch the cold inside me. I thought about the years I'd spent building a life for Emily, the way I'd poured my soul into her dreams while mine faded into the background. She'd been my purpose, my reason to keep going. And now, at 25, she'd decided I was disposable. I didn't know how it had come to this. Maybe it started when she met Derek, her fiancé, a man with a smile too polished and eyes that never quite met mine. He'd moved into our house 6 months ago, his presence like a slow poison. He'd whispered to Emily when he thought I couldn't hear, his words laced with contempt for the woman who'd given up everything for her daughter. "She's holding you back," I'd overheard him say once, and I'd felt the ground shift beneath me. I tried to talk to Emily, to warn her, but she'd shut me out, her loyalty shifting to him. I sipped the coffee, bitter and lukewarm, and wondered where I'd gone wrong. Had I loved her too much? Not enough. I'd always thought love was enough to keep a family together, but now I saw it could be twisted, used as a weapon. The rain slowed to a drizzle, and I forced myself to think. $6 wouldn't get me far, but I had to find somewhere to go. A motel was out of the question. Even the cheapest ones cost more than I had. I thought about the women's shelter downtown, but pride knotted my stomach at the idea. I wasn't ready to admit I'd fallen that far. Instead, I walked to the bus station, where I could at least stay dry for a while. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on the faces of other lost souls waiting for a way out. I sat on a bench, my suitcase at my feet, and tried to piece together what had happened. Emily's anger had been building for months, but I hadn't seen it clearly until tonight. The arguments had started small, over money, over space, over the way I'd embarrassed her in front of Derek. But they'd grown, each one sharper than the last, until tonight, when she'd handed me the suitcase and told me to leave. "You're not my responsibility anymore," she'd said, as if I'd ever asked her to carry me. I pulled the $6 from my pocket, smoothing the bills on my knee. It was all I had left from the last paycheck I'd earned before I lost my job at the library. Budget cuts, they'd said. I hadn't told Emily. Hadn't wanted to burden her. Maybe that was my mistake, keeping things from her, trying to protect her even when she didn't want my protection. The bus station clock ticked past midnight, and I realized I couldn't stay there forever. I needed a plan, but my mind was a fog of hurt and exhaustion. I thought about my sister, Clara, who lived 2 towns over. We hadn't spoken in years, not since our falling out over something I could barely remember. But she was family, and maybe that still meant something. I used one of my precious dollars to call her from a payphone, my heart pounding as it rang. When she answered, her voice was cautious but not unkind. "Eleanor, what's wrong?" I told her everything, the words spilling out like the rain that had soaked me. She listened, and when I finished, she said, "Come to me. I've got a spare room." Relief flooded me, but it was tinged with shame. I'd always been the strong one, the one who held things together. Now I was the one who needed saving. The next morning, I took a bus to Clara's, my suitcase rattling in the overhead rack. She met me at the station, her face softer than I remembered. We didn't talk about the past, only the present. And for the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. Clara's house was small but warm, filled with the smell of bread and the sound of her old radio. She gave me a bed, a hot meal, and a promise that I could stay as long as I needed. I wanted to believe it was a fresh start, but the hurt of Emily's betrayal lingered, a wound that wouldn't close. I spent the next few days settling in, trying to find my footing. Clara urged me to get out, to do something to keep my mind off things. So I started taking walks, wandering the quiet streets of her town. One morning, I stopped at a corner store to buy a newspaper, hoping to find a job listing. On a whim, I spent my last dollar on a lottery ticket, scratching it off with a penny I found on the counter. I didn't expect anything. Lotteries were for dreamers, not people like me. But as I scratched away the silver coating, my breath caught. The numbers stared back at me. Impossible and real, $1 million. I checked it again, then again, my hands shaking. The clerk confirmed it, his eyes wide with disbelief. I was a millionaire. The money changed everything and nothing. I was still the woman Emily had thrown out, still the mother who'd lost her daughter. But now, I had power, a kind I'd never known. I could rebuild my life, maybe even find a way to make Emily see what she'd done. The thought of her face when she heard about the money twisted something inside me. I wanted her to know what she'd thrown away, to feel the weight of her choice. But more than that, I wanted to understand why she'd done it. I wanted answers. And maybe, just maybe, a chance to fix what was broken. I didn't know it then, but the money was only the beginning. It would bring Emily back to me, but not in the way I hoped. It would test us both, force us to face the truths we'd buried, and show me that revenge, redemption, and love are sometimes impossible to untangle. The days after winning the lottery were a blur of disbelief and cautious planning. Clara sat with me at her kitchen table, a notepad between us, as we tried to make sense of the $1 million that had landed in my lap. I'd always been practical, pinching pennies to make ends meet. So the idea of having more money than I could fathom felt like a dream I didn't trust. Clara, ever the voice of reason, insisted I meet with a financial advisor before touching a cent. You don't want to be one of those lottery winners who ends up broke in a year, she said, her eyes crinkling with concern. I nodded, but my mind was elsewhere, tangled in thoughts of Emily. The money was a lifeline, but it was also a weapon, one I wasn't sure how to wield. I wanted to hurt her the way she'd hurt me, to make her regret turning me out with nothing. But every time I imagined confronting her, I saw the little girl she used to be, the one who'd clung to my hand during thunderstorms, and my resolve wavered. I couldn't shake the hope that there was still a way to reach her, to mend what had broken between us. The financial advisor, a woman named Susan with a no-nonsense demeanor, walked me through the steps: taxes, investments, a trust to keep the money safe. I listened, signed papers, and watched as my $6 turned into a bank account with more zeros than I could count. But even as I secured my future, I felt hollow. The money couldn't erase the image of Emily's cold stare or the sound of the door slamming behind me. Susan noticed my distraction and asked if I was okay. I forced a smile, said I was just overwhelmed. But the truth was I was drowning in questions. Why had Emily turned against me? Was it just Derek's influence? Or had I failed her in some way I couldn't see? I needed to know, but I wasn't ready to face her, not yet. Instead, I focused on rebuilding my life. Clara helped me find a small apartment in town, a cozy place with a view of the park. I furnished it sparingly, still unaccustomed to spending money without guilt. I started painting again, something I hadn't done in years, letting the colors spill onto the canvas like emotions I couldn't name. The act of creating felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. The woman I'd been before motherhood consumed me. But every brushstroke was haunted by Emily, her laughter, her anger, the way she'd looked at me like I was nothing. One evening, as I sat on my new balcony with a glass of cheap wine, my phone rang. The number was Emily's, and my heart lurched. I hadn't heard from her since that night in the rain, and I wasn't sure I wanted to. But curiosity, or maybe hope, made me answer. Her voice was different, softer, almost hesitant. "Mom, I heard about the lottery," she said, and I could hear the strain in her words, like she was trying to keep them light. "Can we talk?" My first instinct was to say no, to tell her she'd made her choice. But there was something in her tone, a crack in her armor, that made me pause. "Okay," I said finally. "Come to my new place tomorrow." She agreed. And when I hung up, my hands were trembling. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew this was my chance to confront her, to demand answers. The next day, I cleaned my apartment obsessively, as if a spotless floor could prepare me for what was coming. When Emily arrived, she looked different, thinner, her eyes shadowed with something I couldn't name. She stood in my doorway, clutching her purse like a shield, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. "Nice place," she said, her voice tight. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. We sat at my small kitchen table, the silence heavy between us. I wanted to ask why she'd come, what she wanted, but the words stuck in my throat. Finally, she broke the silence. "I'm sorry, Mom," she said, her eyes fixed on the table. "I didn't mean for things to get so bad." Her apology caught me off guard, and for a moment, I felt the old pull of love, the instinct to forgive her. But then I remembered the ring, the $6, the way she'd turned me out. "Why did you do it?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. She flinched, and I saw tears well in her eyes. "It was Derek," she said, her words tumbling out. "He kept saying you were dragging me down, that we couldn't move forward with you in the house. I believed him. I was wrong. Her admission hit me like a punch. I'd suspected Derek's influence, but hearing it confirmed was different. Anger surged through Minute just at him, but at her for letting him poison what we had. You chose him over me, I said, my voice trembling. You threw me out with nothing. She looked away, tears spilling down her cheeks. I know, she whispered. I don't know how to fix it. I wanted to scream, to tell her she couldn't fix it, that some things were too broken to repair. But I also saw the girl I'd raised, the one who'd made mistakes but was still my daughter. The money gave me power, but it couldn't tell me what to do with it. Should I forgive her? Punish her? Use the money to pull her back to me or push her away for good? I didn't have answers. Only a storm of emotions I couldn't untangle. We talked for hours, our words raw and jagged, cutting through years of unspoken pain. She told me about Derek's control, how he'd manipulated her into thinking I was the problem. I told her about the hurt, the betrayal, the nights I'd spent wondering where I'd gone wrong. By the time she left, we hadn't resolved anything, but something had shifted. The door between us was cracked open, just enough to let a sliver of light through. I didn't know if it was enough to rebuild what we'd lost, but it was a start. That night, I lay awake, thinking about the money and what it meant. It could buy me a new life, but it couldn't buy back the years I'd lost with Emily. I wanted justice for what she'd done, but I also wanted her back in my life. The two desires warred within me, and I realized that the path forward wasn't about choosing one over the other. It was about finding a way to balance them, to hold her accountable while still leaving room for redemption. The lottery had given me a chance to rewrite my story, but it was up to me to decide how it would end. The weeks that followed Emily's visit were a strange dance of hope and caution. I wanted to believe her apology was genuine, but the wound she'd left was still raw, and I couldn't shake the fear that she'd come back only because of the money. I kept my distance, agreeing to meet her for coffee or short walks in the park, but I didn't let her back into my heart, not fully. Each time we met, she seemed a little more like the daughter I remembered, her laughter softer, her eyes less guarded. But there was always a shadow behind her words, a hint of something unspoken. I wondered if it was guilt, or maybe fear of Derek, who still loomed over her life like a storm cloud. I hadn't seen him since the night she kicked me out, but I felt his presence in the way she hesitated before answering my questions about him. We're working things out, she'd say, her voice tight, and I'd nod, not pushing, though every instinct screamed to dig deeper. I spent my days settling into my new life, the lottery money giving me a freedom I'd never known. I enrolled in an art class at the community center, where I met people who didn't know my past, who saw me as Eleanor, the painter, not Eleanor, the discarded mother. The act of creating, mixing colors, shaping emotions into forms felt like a rebellion against the years I'd let myself disappear. But even as I painted, my thoughts circled back to Emily. I wanted to help her, to pull her out of Derek's grip, but I didn't know how without risking my own heart again. One afternoon, as I was leaving the art center, my phone buzzed with a text from Emily. Can we meet tonight? It's important. My stomach nodded. I agreed, suggesting a quiet diner near my apartment. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting in a corner booth, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. She looked nervous, her fingers tapping a restless rhythm on the table. What's wrong? I asked, sliding into the seat across from her. She took a deep breath, her eyes darting around the diner before settling on me. Derek knows about the money, she said. He's been pushing me to ask you for some of it. My heart sank, though I wasn't surprised. I'd suspected Derek's influence from the moment she'd called me after the lottery win. And what did you tell him? I asked, keeping my voice steady. She looked down at her tea. Her face flushed. I told him I wouldn't ask you for anything. But he's persistent. The word hung between us, heavy with meaning. I knew what persistent meant with a man like Derek. Pressure. Manipulation. Maybe worse. I wanted to reach across the table and shake her, to demand why she stayed with someone who treated her like a pawn. But I saw the fear in her eyes, and it stopped me. Emily, I said softly, why are you still with him? She didn't answer right away, her gaze fixed on the table. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I thought he loved me. I thought he was my future. But now, I don't know anymore. Her words broke something in me, not just because of her pain, but because I saw myself in her, the younger me who'd stayed too long with a man who didn't deserve me. Emily's father. I'd escaped, but not without scars. And I didn't want that for her. You don't have to stay, I said, leaning forward. You're stronger than you think. She shook her head, tears brimming. I don't know how to leave. Mom. He's everywhere. I wanted to fix it, to swoop in and save her like I had when she was a child. But she wasn't a child anymore, and I couldn't fight her battles for her. Instead, I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. You're not alone, I said. I'm here. She nodded, but the fear didn't leave her eyes. That night, I couldn't sleep, my mind racing with ways to help her. The money gave me options, but it also complicated things. If I gave her money, would it go to Derek? If I didn't, would she think I was punishing her? I thought about hiring a lawyer, maybe even a private investigator to dig into Derek's past. The idea of revenge flickered in my mind, not just against Emily for what she'd done, but against Derek for what he was doing to her. I wanted him to pay, to feel the weight of his actions. But I also knew that revenge wouldn't heal the rift between me and Emily. It might feel good for a moment, but it wouldn't bring us back together. The next morning, I called Clara, who'd become my anchor in all this. I told her about Emily's visit, about Derek's pressure. Clara listened, then said, You can't save her if she's not ready to save herself. But you can show her there's a way out. Her words stuck with me, and I realized she was right. I couldn't force Emily to leave Derek, but I could give her a glimpse of a life without him. I started inviting her to my apartment more often, not to talk about Derek or the money, but to share small moments, cooking dinner, watching old movies, laughing over memories of her childhood. Slowly, I saw her relax, her smiles coming easier. But I also saw the tension she carried, the way her phone would buzz and her face would tighten, as if Derek's shadow followed her everywhere. One evening, as we were washing dishes together, she turned to me, her eyes bright with tears. I don't know how to fix what I did to you, she said. I don't know if I can. I set down the plate I was holding, my heart aching. It's not about fixing it, I said. It's about moving forward. Together. She nodded. And for the first time, I felt like we were on the same side. But I knew it wouldn't be easy. Derek was still out there, and the money was still a magnet, pulling at everyone's motives. I had to be careful, not just for my sake, but for hers. I didn't know what lay ahead, but I knew I wouldn't let her go again, not without a fight. As the weeks turned into months, I watched Emily struggle to untangle herself from Derek's grip. Our meetings became more frequent, each one a small victory in rebuilding what we'd lost. She'd show up at my apartment with stories of her day, her voice lighter than before. But there was always a moment when her phone would light up with his name, and her face would cloud over. I didn't push her to talk about him, though every part of me wanted to. Instead, I focused on being the mother I'd always been, steady, present, a safe place for her to land. But the money, that $1 million sitting in my bank account, was a constant presence, like a third person in the room. I hadn't told Emily how much I'd won, only that I'd come into some money. But I knew Derek's influence lingered, and I couldn't shake the fear that her apologies were tied to it. One crisp autumn afternoon, we went for a walk in the park near my apartment, the leaves crunching under our feet. Emily seemed quieter than usual, her hands stuffed deep in her coat pockets. "Mom," she said finally, stopping by a bench. "I need to tell you something." My heart quickened, bracing for bad news. "What is it?" I asked, sitting beside her. She took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the ground. "I'm leaving Derek," she said. "I can't do it anymore." Relief washed over me, but it was tempered by caution. "What changed?" I asked, careful not to let my hope show too much. She looked up, her eyes fierce with determination. "I saw who he really is. He's been using me, Mom. He's been using both of us." Her words confirmed what I'd suspected, but hearing them was like a weight lifting and settling all at once. I wanted to ask for details, to know exactly what he'd done, but I could see she wasn't ready to share more. "I'm proud of you," I said instead, reaching for her hand. "It's not easy to walk away." She squeezed my hand, her grip tight, and for a moment, we sat in silence, the wind rustling the leaves around us. I thought about the night she'd kicked me out, how I'd stood in the rain with nothing but $6 and a broken heart. I'd wanted revenge then, wanted her to feel the pain she'd caused me. But now, seeing her fight for her own freedom, I felt something else, pride, mixed with a fierce protectiveness. I knew leaving Derek wouldn't be simple. Men like him didn't let go easily. Over the next few days, I helped Emily plan her escape. She didn't want to involve the police. Not yet. But she agreed to stay with me for a while. I gave her the spare room in my apartment, turning it into a sanctuary with fresh linens and a few of her favorite books from childhood. She moved in quietly, her belongings fitting into a single duffel bag, a mirror of my own exile months earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I didn't mention it. We were both starting over, in our own ways. Living together again was strange at first, like stepping into a house we'd both outgrown. We tiptoed around each other, careful not to reopen old wounds. But slowly, we found a rhythm, cooking meals together, sharing stories, laughing over small things. I saw glimpses of the Emily I'd raised, the girl who'd loved to draw and dream, and it gave me hope that we could rebuild. But Derek wasn't gone. He called her constantly, leaving voicemails that swung between charm and menace. I urged her to block his number, but she hesitated, saying she didn't want to escalate things. I didn't push, but I started researching ways to protect her restraining orders. Legal aid, anything that could keep him at a distance. The money made it easier. I could afford a good lawyer, someone who could make sure Derek stayed away. But I also knew money could complicate things, make Emily a target if Derek thought he could get to it through her. One night, as we sat watching a movie, Emily's phone buzzed again. She glanced at it, her face paling. and handed it to me. The text was from Derek. I know where you are. You can't hide from me. My blood ran cold. I wanted to march to his door and confront him myself. But I knew that wasn't the answer. Instead, I called Clara, who'd dealt with her own share of difficult men in her past. She came over the next morning, her presence a steadying force. You need to document everything, she said, handing Emily a notebook. Every call, every text, every time he shows up. It'll help if you need to go to court. Emily nodded, but I could see the fear in her eyes. I hated that she was scared, hated that I couldn't shield her from it. But I also knew this was her fight, and my role was to stand beside her, not in front of her. That evening, I took her to my art class, hoping to distract her. She hesitated at first, but soon she was sketching alongside me, her pencil moving with a freedom I hadn't seen in years. For a few hours, we were just mother and daughter, creating together. The weight of the past and the threat of Derek pushed to the background. But when we got home, there was a letter slipped under my door. No stamp, no return address. I opened it, my hands steady despite the dread curling in my stomach. The words were typed. Anonymous. But the message was clear. You can't keep her from me. The money won't save you. I showed it to Emily, and her face crumpled. It's him, she whispered. He's not going to stop. I pulled her into a hug, my own fear buried under a fierce determination. Derek might think he could intimidate us, but he didn't know the strength of a mother's love, or the fire that had been kindled in me since that night in the rain. I'd lost everything once, but I wasn't going to lose my daughter again. We'd face this together, and I'd use every resource I had: money, love, resolvito, make sure we came out on the other side. The letter from Derek marked a turning point. It wasn't just a threat. It was a declaration of war. I saw the fear in Emily's eyes, but I also saw something a spark of defiance, a resolve that mirrored my own. We couldn't ignore Derek anymore. Couldn't pretend he'd just fade away. I hired a lawyer the next day, a woman named Rachel who specialized in domestic disputes. She was calm but fierce, her office lined with books and photos of her own daughters. We'll start with a restraining order, she said, her pen moving briskly across a legal pad. But you need to be prepared for him to push back. Emily nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I could see she was trying to be strong, but the weight of Derek's shadow was heavy. I reached for her hand, and she didn't pull away. Rachel advised us to keep a low profile, to avoid any contact with Derek while she worked on the legal side. I also hired a private investigator, a quiet man named Tom who'd come recommended by Clara. His job was to dig into Derek's past, to find anything that could help us build a case against him. I didn't tell Emily about Tom. I didn't want her to feel like I was taking over. But I needed to know who we were dealing with. Needed to understand the man who'd turned my daughter against me and now threatened us both. The days that followed were tense, filled with waiting and watching. Emily stayed close to home, only leaving for work or our art classes, always checking over her shoulder. I installed a security system in my apartment, the beeps and lights a constant reminder of the danger we were in. But I also tried to keep things normal, to give Emily a sense of safety. We cooked together, laughed over old photos, and talked about the future: hers, mine, ours. She started opening up about her dreams, things she hadn't shared since she was a teenager. She wanted to go back to school, maybe study graphic design. I encouraged her, promising to help however I could, though I was careful not to mention the money. I didn't want her to think my support came with strings. One evening, Tom called with news. He'd found something court records from another state. A history of harassment charges against Derek that had been dropped when the victims refused to testify. He's good at intimidation, Tom said, his voice low. But he's sloppy. There's a paper trail if you know where to look. I thanked him, my mind racing. This was the leverage we needed. Proof that Derek wasn't just a problem for us, but a pattern. I shared the information with Rachel, who added it to the case she was building. But I didn't tell Emily. Not yet. I wanted to protect her from the fear, to let her focus on healing. Instead, I suggested we take a weekend trip to Clara's, a chance to get away from the city and the constant threat of Derek. Clara welcomed us with open arms, her house a haven of warmth and normalcy. We spent the weekend baking, walking through the woods, and talking late into the night. Emily seemed lighter, her laughter genuine for the first time in months. But on our last night there, she got a call from a number she didn't recognize. She answered before I could stop her, and I saw her face drain of color. She hung up quickly, her hands shaking. It was him, she said. He knows we're here. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to stay calm. He's trying to scare you, I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. We're safe here. Clara, ever practical, called the local police, who promised to patrol the area. But the incident shattered the peace we'd found, and I knew we couldn't keep running from him. When we returned to the city, I met with Rachel again. She'd filed the restraining order, but it hadn't been served yet. Derek was proving hard to track down. He's avoiding us, she said, her brow furrowed. But we'll find him. I nodded, but the uncertainty gnawed at me. I wanted to confront Derek myself, to look him in the eye and tell him he'd lost. But I knew that was a fantasy, a dangerous one. Instead, I focused on Emily, on helping her rebuild her confidence. We started going to a support group for women who'd experienced controlling relationships, a suggestion from Rachel. At first, Emily was reluctant, but after a few meetings, she started to open up, sharing her story with others who understood. I sat in the back, listening, my heart swelling with pride and pain. She was fighting, not just for herself, but for the life she wanted. One night, after a particularly intense group session, Emily turned to me as we walked home. I'm sorry I let him come between us, she said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. I should have listened to you. I stopped, turning to face her. You're here now? I said. That's what matters. She hugged me, her arms tight around me, and for the first time, I felt like we were truly on the path to healing. But the next morning, Rachel called with news that chilled me. Derek had been served the restraining order, but he'd left a message with her office. Tell Eleanor she can't protect her forever. The threat was clear, and it lit a fire in me. I'd spent my life protecting Emily, and I wasn't about to stop now. The money gave me resources, but it was my love for her that gave me strength. I didn't know how this would end, but I knew I'd do whatever it took to keep her safe. Derek might think he could break us, but he didn't know the woman I'd become, the one who'd walked away from nothing and built a new life from $6 and a lottery ticket. The threat from Derek hung over us like a storm that wouldn't break. I tried to keep Emily focused on the present, on the small steps we were taking together. But fear had a way of creeping into every moment. She checked her phone less often, but when she did, her hands trembled, as if expecting another message from him. I wanted to take the phone and smash it, to cut off his access to her. But I knew that wasn't the answer. She had to choose her freedom, just as I'd had to choose mine. Rachel, our lawyer, worked tirelessly, coordinating with the police to track Derek's movements. The restraining order was in place, but it felt like a flimsy shield against a man who thrived on control. Tom, the private investigator, kept digging, uncovering more about Derek's past debts, failed businesses, a string of relationships marked by accusations of coercion. He's a con man, Tom said during one of our calls. But he's smart. He knows how to stay just inside the law. I thanked him, my mind churning with possibilities. If Derek was after the money, he'd be relentless. But I wasn't about to let him win. I started funneling some of the lottery winnings into a trust for Emily, one she couldn't access until she was free of him. It was my way of ensuring her future, no matter what happened. I didn't tell her about it. I didn't want her to feel like I was trying to buy her loyalty. Instead, I focused on helping her rebuild her life, one day at a time. We kept attending the support group, and I saw her grow stronger with each meeting. She started speaking up, sharing her story with a clarity that made my heart ache and swell at the same time. She was finding her voice, and I was finding my daughter again. But the threat of Derek was never far away. One evening, as we left the community center after art class, I noticed a car parked across the street, its engine idling. The windows were tinted, but I felt eyes on us, a prickling sensation that made my skin crawl. Emily noticed it too, her steps faltering. It's probably nothing, I said, guiding her toward home. But my heart was racing. That night, I called Tom and asked him to look into it. He confirmed my suspicions the next day. The car was registered to a friend of Derek's, someone with a history of doing his dirty work. He's watching you, Tom said. But he's keeping his distance for now. The news sent a chill through me, but it also steeled my resolve. I wasn't going to let Derek intimidate us. I upgraded the security system, adding cameras and motion sensors, and started driving Emily to and from work. She protested at first, saying she didn't want to live in fear, but I could see the relief in her eyes when I was there. We were in this together, and I wasn't going to let her face it alone. One afternoon, Rachel called with an update. The police had questioned Derek about the letter and his recent behavior, but he denied everything, claiming he was the victim of a misunderstanding. He's slippery, Rachel said, frustration in her voice. But we're building a case. If he slips up, we'll have him. I thanked her, but the waiting was agony. I wanted this to be over, wanted Emily to be free. That evening, I suggested we go to Clara's again, hoping a change of scenery would ease the tension. Emily agreed, and we packed light, driving through the dusk to Clara's quiet town. Her house was a refuge, its familiar smells and sounds wrapping around us like a blanket. We spent the weekend painting, gardening, and talking about everything but Derek. For a few days, it felt like we'd escaped him. But on our last morning, as we were loading the car, Clara pulled me aside. "There's been a man asking about you in town," she said, her voice low. Didn't give his name, but he matches Derek's description. My stomach dropped. I glanced at Emily, who was laughing as she tossed a bag into the trunk, and decided not to tell her not yet. I didn't want to shatter the peace she'd found. Instead, I called Tom as soon as we got back to the city, asking him to step up his surveillance. He promised to put a tail on Derek, to catch him if he got too close. The waiting was unbearable, but I filled the days with purpose. I started volunteering at the community center, teaching art to kids who reminded me of Emily at that age. It gave me a sense of grounding, a reminder that I was more than the sum of my pain. Emily joined me sometimes, her sketches full of color and life, and I saw her confidence growing. But the shadow of Derek was always there, a reminder that our peace was fragile. One night, as we sat on my balcony, Emily turned to me, her face serious. "I want to confront him," she said. "I want to tell him it's over. Face to face." My heart stopped. "It's too dangerous," I said, my voice firm. "Let Rachel and the police handle it." But she shook her head, her jaw set. "I need to do this, Mom. I need to take back my power." I wanted to argue, to lock her away where Derek could never reach her. But I saw the fire in her eyes, the same fire I'd felt when I'd walked away from my own past. She was ready to fight, and I had to trust her. We made a plan. She'd meet Derek in a public place, with Tom nearby and the police on standby. I hated it, but I knew it was her choice. The day of the meeting, I stood by her side as she prepared, my heart in my throat. She looked strong, determined, but I saw the tremor in her hands. "I'll be okay," she said, squeezing my arm. I nodded, praying she was right. As she walked away, I felt the weight of every moment that had led us here, the betrayal, the pain, the slow rebuilding of trust. I didn't know what would happen, but I knew one thing: we were stronger together than we'd ever been apart. The day Emily planned to confront Derek was the longest of my life. We chose a busy cafe downtown, its windows bright with afternoon light, a place where she'd be safe in a crowd. Tom was positioned across the street, his car blending into the city's hum, and Rachel had alerted the police, who promised to be nearby. I wanted to be there, to stand between Emily and the man who'd hurt her. But she'd insisted on doing this alone. "I need to face him myself," she'd said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. I'd nodded, swallowing my protests, and let her go, my heart pounding as I watched her walk away. I stayed home, pacing my apartment, the clock ticking too slowly. Every few minutes, I checked my phone, hoping for a text from Emily or Tom, anything to tell me she was okay. The silence was torture, each second stretching into eternity. I tried to distract myself with painting, but my hands shook, smearing the colors into a chaotic mess. All I could think about was Emily, standing up to the man who'd manipulated her, who'd torn us apart. I prayed she'd find the strength she needed, that she'd come back to me whole. Finally, my phone buzzed with a message from Tom. "She's in the cafe." "He's there. Everything's under control." I exhaled, but the relief was fleeting. I knew Derek's charm, how he could twist words to make you doubt yourself. I trusted Emily, but I didn't trust him. An hour later, my phone rang. It was Emily, her voice shaky but strong. "It's done," she said. I told him it's over. I gripped the phone, my heart racing. "Are you okay? Did he try anything?" She paused, and I could hear the bustle of the cafe in the background. "He was angry," she said. But I didn't back down. I told him I was done, that I'd go to the police if he didn't leave me alone. He left. Pride surged through me, mixed with fear. "Where are you now?" I asked. "I'm coming home," she said, and I could hear the relief in her voice. "I'll be there soon." When she walked through the door, I pulled her into a hug, holding her tightly. She was trembling, but her eyes were clear, brighter than I'd seen in months. She told me everything how Derek had tried to charm her at first, then turned cold when she stood her ground. He said he'd make me regret it, she admitted, her voice low. But I didn't let him scare me. I wanted to believe it was over, that Derek would slink away and leave us alone. But I knew men like him didn't give up easily. I called Tom, who confirmed that Derek had left the cafe but was still in the city. I'll keep an eye on him, Tom promised. He's rattled, but he's not done. That night, Emily and I sat on the couch, a blanket draped over us, and talked about the future. She wanted to start fresh, to go back to school, to build a life free of Derek's shadow. I told her about the trust I'd set up, careful to emphasize that it was hers no matter what. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, I saw the little girl who'd believed I could fix anything. You didn't have to do that, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I wanted to, I said. You're my daughter. We didn't talk about the money again, but I could feel it shifting the air between us, a reminder of the power it held. I didn't want it to define us, but I knew it could protect us, give us the tools to fight back. The next few days were quiet, almost too quiet. Emily went back to work, and I kept volunteering at the community center. But I was always on edge, waiting for Derek's next move. Rachel called with an update. The police had warned Derek to stay away, but there was little they could do unless he violated the restraining order. He's playing it smart, she said, but we're ready if he steps out of line. I thanked her, but the waiting was wearing me down. I started having nightmares, Derek breaking into the apartment, Emily disappearing, the money vanishing into thin air. I woke up gasping, my heart pounding, and checked on Emily to make sure she was still there. One morning, as I was leaving for the community center, I found another letter under my door. The same typed words, the same menacing tone. You think you've won, but this isn't over. I called Rachel immediately, and she sent it to the police for analysis. Tom stepped up his surveillance, reporting that Derek had been seen near the cafe where Emily worked. He's testing the boundaries, Tom said, but he hasn't crossed them yet. I hated the waiting, the constant looking over our shoulders. I wanted to confront Derek myself, to tell him to back off, but I knew that would only make things worse. Instead, I focused on Emily, on helping her stay strong. We started planning her application for art school, spending evenings researching programs and filling out forms. It was a small act of defiance, a way of saying that Derek couldn't control our future. But the fear lingered, a constant reminder that he was still out there, watching, waiting. One night, as we were working on her portfolio, Emily looked at me, her eyes serious. I want to make things right with you, she said. Not just because of Derek, but because of what I did. I need you to know I'm sorry. I reached for her hand, my throat tight. I know, I said. We're finding our way back. She nodded, tears in her eyes, and I felt the weight of our past lifting. Just a little. But I knew the road ahead was still long, and Derek was still a shadow we couldn't fully escape. The money had given us a chance, but it was our love, our resilience, that would see us through. I didn't know what Derek's next move would be, but I was ready to face it, for Emily's sake and for my own. The tension in our lives grew sharper with each passing day, like a blade being honed. Derek's letters stopped, but his presence lingered in the way Emily's shoulders tensed when her phone buzzed, or the way I double-checked the locks every night. Tom's reports painted a picture of a man biding his time, moving just close enough to remind us he was there without breaking the law. It was a game of patience, and I hated playing it. I wanted to end this, to find a way to make Derek disappear for good. But Rachel warned me to stay cautious. He's looking for a reaction, she said. Don't give him one. So I focused on Emily, on the fragile trust we were rebuilding. She was thriving in small ways. Her sketches for art school were vibrant, full of life, and she'd started smiling more. The kind of smile that reached her eyes. We spent evenings together, planning her future, talking about dreams we'd both buried long ago. But the fear was always there, a quiet undercurrent that kept us on edge. One morning, as I was leaving for the community center, I noticed a man lingering across the street, his face half hidden by a hoodie. My heart skipped, but I told myself it was nothing, just paranoia. I mentioned it to Tom, who promised to check the security footage. That evening, he called with news that made my blood run cold. It was Derek, he said. He was outside your building for almost an hour. I gripped the phone, my mind racing. What was he doing? I asked. Just standing there, Tom said. Watching. The image sent a shiver through me. I told Emily, expecting her to panic. But she surprised me. I'm not going to let him control me anymore, she said, her voice firm. We need to end this. Her determination was a spark, igniting something in me. I'd been passive too long, waiting for Derek to make a mistake. It was time to take control. I met with Rachel the next day, laying out everything: Tom's findings, the letters, Derek's history. We have enough for a stronger case, she said. But we need him to violate the restraining order in a way we can prove. I nodded, an idea forming. What if we set a trap? I asked. Rachel raised an eyebrow, but listened as I outlined my plan. We'd lure Derek out, get him to approach Emily in a controlled setting, with Tom and the police ready to act. It was risky, but I was tired of living in fear. Emily agreed to the plan, though I could see the fear in her eyes. We chose the same cafe where she'd confronted him before, a place he'd feel bold enough to approach. Tom coordinated with the police, setting up surveillance, while Rachel prepared the legal groundwork. The day of the plan, I watched Emily get ready, her hands steady as she tied her hair back. I'm scared, she admitted, looking at me. But I'm ready. I hugged her, my heart swelling with pride and terror. You're not alone, I said. I'm right here. We arrived at the cafe separately, Emily sitting by the window while I waited nearby, out of sight. Tom was across the street, his car blending into the afternoon traffic, and the police were stationed a block away. My phone was on, ready to signal if anything went wrong. Emily ordered a coffee, her movements calm but deliberate, and I watched her through the window, my chest tight. An hour passed, then two. I started to think Derek wouldn't show, that we'd miscalculated. But then I saw him, striding toward the cafe with that same polished confidence I'd always distrusted. My heart pounded as he pushed open the door and approached Emily's table. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I saw her body stiffen, then relax as she leaned forward, her voice steady. Tom texted me, he's breaking the order. Police are moving in. I held my breath, watching as Derek leaned closer, his face twisted with anger. Emily stood her ground, her hands steady on the table. Then, in a flash, the police were there, pulling Derek away as he shouted, his words lost in the chaos. Emily stayed seated, her face pale but composed, as they cuffed him and let him out. I rushed into the cafe, wrapping her in my arms. "You did it," I whispered, tears in my eyes. She nodded, her breath shaky. "It's over," she said, and I wanted to believe her. The police took Derek into custody, charging him with violating the restraining order and harassment. Rachel assured us the evidence was solid, bolstered by Tom's surveillance and the history we'd uncovered. But even as we celebrated the victory, I knew it wasn't the end. Derek's arrest was a step, but the scars he'd left would take longer to heal. That night, Emily and I sat on my balcony, the city lights stretching out before us. "I thought I'd feel free," she said, her voice soft. "But I just feel tired." I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "Healing takes time," I said. "But you're not alone." She smiled, a small, hopeful smile, and I felt the weight of our journey settle into something new, not revenge, not even redemption, but a quiet strength we'd built together. The money had given us options, but it was our love that had carried us through. Derek was behind bars, but the real victory was the bond we were rebuilding, one moment at a time. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid to face it. Derek's arrest brought a fragile peace, but it didn't erase the past. Emily and I were learning to navigate our new reality, one where we could breathe a little easier but still carried the weight of what had happened. The police had enough evidence to hold Derek, and Rachel was confident he'd face real consequences, maybe even jail time if the harassment charges stuck. But I knew better than to think a man like him would vanish quietly. Tom kept tabs on Derek's case, reporting that he'd hired a slick lawyer who was trying to poke holes in the evidence. It wasn't over. Not yet. But for now, we had room to heal. Emily threw herself into her art school application, her portfolio growing into a vibrant collection of sketches and paintings that told the story of her resilience. I watched her work, marveling at the way she channeled her pain into beauty. She was stronger than she realized, and I told her so, though she'd blush and change the subject. We spent our evenings together, sometimes talking, sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence. It was a kind of closeness I hadn't dared hope for after that night in the rain. But the money was still there, a silent force shaping our choices. I'd used some of it to cover legal fees and Tom's services, but the bulk remained in the trust, a safety net for Emily's future. I didn't want it to define us, but I couldn't ignore its power. One day, Emily asked about it directly, her voice hesitant. "Mom, why didn't you tell me how much you won?" she asked, stirring her coffee as we sat in the kitchen. I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "I didn't want it to change how you saw me," I said. "I wanted us to rebuild because of us, not the money." She nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "I don't want it," she said. "Not now. I want to earn my own way." Her words filled me with pride, but they also reminded me of the distance we'd yet to close. She was still proving herself, still carrying the guilt of what she'd done. I wanted to tell her she didn't need to earn my love, but I knew she needed time to believe it. As winter settled in, we fell into a routine work. Art classes, support group meetings. Emily started therapy, a step I hadn't expected but welcomed. She said it helped her untangle the years with Derek, the way he'd twisted her thoughts. I saw her growing stronger, more sure of herself, and it gave me hope. But I also saw the moments when fear crept back, when a strange noise or an unfamiliar car made her flinch. Derek's lawyer was pushing for a plea deal, and Rachel warned us he might get off with probation. The thought of him walking free made my stomach churn, but I tried to stay calm for Emily's sake. One evening, as we were decorating a small Christmas tree in my apartment, Emily turned to me, her eyes bright with an idea. "I want to do something with the money," she said. "Not for Meph or other women like me." I set down the ornament I was holding, intrigued. "What do you mean?" I asked. She explained her vision, a fund to help women escape abusive relationships, covering legal fees, housing, therapy, things that had made a difference for her. "I want to turn what happened to us into something good," she said, her voice fierce. I was stunned, not just by the idea, but by the passion behind it. This was my daughter, the one I'd raised to care, to fight, to dream. "Let's do it," I said, my heart swelling. We spent the next few weeks researching, meeting with Rachel to set up a nonprofit. We called it Haven, a name Emily chose for the safety it promised. The money gave us the means to start, but it was Emily's drive that brought it to life. She reached out to her support group, gathering stories and ideas, and I saw her transform into a leader, someone who could turn pain into purpose. But even as we worked on Haven, Derek's shadow lingered. Tom called one morning with news. Derek had been released on bail, his lawyer pulling strings to delay the trial. "He's staying at a motel on the edge of town," Tom said, "but he's not supposed to come near you," I told Emily, and her face paled, but she squared her shoulders. "He can't stop us," she said. I nodded, but I wasn't so sure. That night, I found another letter under my door. The same typed words, "You'll never be free of me." I called Rachel, who sent it to the police. But the fear was back, sharper than ever. Emily insisted we keep going, that we couldn't let Derek derail us. So we did, pouring our energy into Haven, meeting with potential donors, and planning our first outreach program. It was exhausting but exhilarating, a way to reclaim our power. One afternoon, as we were leaving a meeting with a local women's shelter, Emily stopped me. "I want to testify against him," she said. "When the trial comes, I want to tell the truth." I looked at her, seeing the strength she'd built, and nodded. "I'll be right there with you," I said. The trial was months away, but the decision gave us both a sense of purpose. We were fighting not just for ourselves, but for every woman Derek had hurt, for every woman Haven would help. The money had given us a start, but it was our love, our resilience, that kept us going. I didn't know if Derek would ever truly be gone, but I knew we were stronger than his threats. We were building something bigger than him, bigger than our pain, and that was a victory he could never take away. Winter deepened, and with it came a sense of resolve. Emily and I threw ourselves into Haven, the nonprofit giving us a purpose that felt bigger than our past. We rented a small office, hired a coordinator, and started connecting with shelters across the state. Emily's passion was infectious, drawing in volunteers who believed in her vision. I watched her speak at our first fundraiser, her voice steady as she shared her story, not all of it, but enough to inspire. She didn't mention Derek by name, but his shadow was there, a reminder of why we were doing this. The money made it possible, but it was Emily's heart that made it real. I was proud, but I was also afraid. Derek's release on bail had shaken us, and though he hadn't contacted us directly since the last letter, Tom's updates kept us vigilant. He was laying low, but men like him didn't disappear. Rachel prepared us for the trial, set for early spring, walking us through what to expect. Emily was determined to testify, to face Derek in court and tell the world what he'd done. I supported her, but the thought of seeing him again made my skin crawl. I wanted justice, not just for us, but for every woman he'd manipulated. As the trial approached, Emily grew quieter. Her focus split between Haven and the looming courtroom. I tried to keep her grounded, inviting her to paint with me, to lose herself in color and light. One evening, as we worked side by side, she set down her brush and looked at me. "Do you think I'm doing the right thing?" she asked. "Testifying. I met her gaze, seeing the doubt and strength intertwined. "You're doing what you need to do," I said, "and I'll be there. Every step." She nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears, and we went back to painting, the silence between us warm with understanding. The trial came faster than I expected. The courtroom was cold, its wooden benches hard under my hands as I sat behind Emily. Derek looked smaller than I remembered, his polished charm dulled by the orange jumpsuit. But his eyes still held that calculating glint. And when they met mine, I felt a chill. Emily took the stand, her voice clear as she recounted his manipulation, his threats, the way he'd turned her against me. I listened, my heart aching for the pain she'd endured, but also swelling with pride at her courage. Derek's lawyer tried to twist her words, to paint her as unstable, but she didn't waver. When it was my turn, I told the truth about the night Emily kicked me out. The letters, the fear he'd instilled. The jury listened, their faces unreadable, and I prayed they saw what we'd been through. The trial lasted 3 days, each one a test of endurance. When the verdict came, guilty on multiple counts of harassment and violating the restraining order, I felt a weight lift. Derek was sentenced to 2 years. Not as long as I'd hoped, but enough to give us breathing room. Emily squeezed my hand as we left the courtroom, her face a mix of relief and exhaustion. "It's really over," she whispered. I nodded, but I knew healing wasn't a straight line. We'd won this battle, but the war was in the quiet moments, the ones where trust was rebuilt and scars faded. Back at home, we celebrated quietly, just the two of us with takeout and a bottle of wine. Haven was growing, with plans for a second location, and Emily was accepted into art school, her future bright with possibility. The money had given us a foundation, but it was our love, our shared fight, that held us together. One night, as we sat on my balcony, Emily turned to me, her eyes soft. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, "for not giving up on me." I smiled, my throat tight. "You're my daughter," I said. "I'll never give up on you." We didn't talk about the money or Derek or the pain of the past. Instead, we talked about the future her classes, my painting, the women Haven would help. The city sparkled below us, a reminder that we'd come through the darkness and found light. I thought about that night in the rain, with $6 in a suitcase, and how far we'd come. Revenge had been a fire in me once, but it had burned out, replaced by something stronger: love, redemption, the chance to start again. Emily leaned her head on my shoulder, and I felt the weight of our journey settle into something new, not just a family, but a partnership, forged in pain and hope. The lottery had changed our lives, but it was our choices, Emily's courage, my forgiveness, that defined us. Derek was gone, for now, but even if he returned, we were ready. We'd face the worst and come out stronger, together.